Jovan Buha! Buha!
Yo, I'm Jovan Buha, Lakers reporter for Buha's Block. And the Lakers traded up for the number 36 pick to draft Adou Thiero out of Arkansas. He's a 6'6", 220-pound defensive wing. He is arguably the best athlete in this draft, and I think it is an incredible fit for the Lakers. This was the guy that they wanted. He's 21 years old, played a couple years at Kentucky, then 1 year at Arkansas. And as I noted earlier in the day, for those who listened to the quick reaction video I did on the Austin Reeves situation with him declining his contract extension offer from the Lakers earlier this week, and then also LA trading up to 45 earlier in the day, that keep an eye on LA trading up, that there was someone that they were looking at in the top 40s. So they end up trading up for number 36, draft Thiero, and I really like the fit. I understand that there were a couple of centers on the board, and you could have made a case for LA drafting a center. But if you look at the two teams that just faced off in the NBA Finals, you had a bunch of perimeter athleticism and defensive versatility in guys like Jalen Williams, Shai Gilgeous-Alexander, and Aaron Nesmith, and Benedict Mathurin. I think Thiero could be that type of guy, and he's an elite athlete, one of the best athletes in the draft, one of the best offensive rebounders in the draft. He's physical, he's strong, he's tough. Looking at some of the comparisons, the Athletic Sam Vecini compared him to a slightly less athletic Amen and Asar Thompson. He said he's like right there with the Thompson twins. The Ringer compared him to Tamani Kamara as the primary comparison. We've talked about Kamara's potential fit with the Lakers, and but also to a lesser extent compared him to Torrey Craig, a Mo Harkless, a Haywood Highsmith. So you see the type of player he is, of that big defensive wing. I think you'd rather him be Kamara compared to like a Craig, but with the number 36 pick and with LA simply spending to trade up, I think that's a smart use of that resource. And I think they deserve credit for identifying a player who could have been a late first round pick and nabbing him in the mid 30s. So I think this is a guy who certainly has some room to grow offensively. If you look at last season, shot 26% on threes, 69% on free throws. So the shot is a clear concern, and that's going to be the thing that ultimately determines his ceiling as a 3-and-D player. Is he more of a defensive wing specialist off the bench and energy guy? And that's the type of guy that's probably a 12, 15, 18-minute a night guy, or can he develop more on the offensive end and be a potential, fifth starter or high-level bench guy? So he does have, he plays with an elite motor. He has a good feel for the game, and his ball handling in terms of attacking the rim, he could dunk on guys, get to the free throw line, is a good line drive guy, but not as much of a self-creation, with counters and shot creation on the perimeter. Bit of a limited passer. I think his assist to turnover ratio is 1.75 to 1.5, something like that. So nearly identical assist to turnover ratio. But with the 36th pick, you're going to have some warts, you're going to have some flaws. And again, I think this is a guy who could have gone in the late first round. And I've said it before, I trust the Lakers scouting department. That's been the strength of the front office for the past 10 plus years. They have far more hits than misses. Their track record speaks for itself. I think it's among the best in the NBA. And I think this dude, based on, again, where the game is trending with athleticism and speed and motor, the Lakers don't really have this type of player on the team. The closest thing is probably Vando, but I would even say I think he's got more off the dribble chops in terms of getting to the rim and finishing than Vando does. So I think he's already at this point in his career a little bit more advanced than Vando was as, average 16 points a game, 6 rebounds a game, nearly 2 steals. So I think Vando's a bit bigger, and it's a high bar to get to where Vando's at defensively, or where Vando's been at his peak defensively. But I think, there's clear upside here. And I know, again, Lakers still have a giant hole in the middle. And there's a couple guys you could have looked at that would have made sense for them to potentially draft. But I would contend that perimeter athleticism is a necessity in the modern NBA. The Lakers do not have a lot of athletic players. And to draft a guy that is arguably the most athletic player in the draft that compares favorably to, like, this is a 1% type athlete. And so I think it's a huge get for the Lakers, and the scouting department strikes again. But shout out to everybody in the chat. Shout out to the late night gang. So we got a couple of super chats here. Just as a heads up, I'm going to be going probably 45 minutes to an hour because I am recording another pod after this. I've been promoting it, but we're doing the Great Western Forum with Pete Zayas and Anthony Irwin. We're recording our first episode tonight. So once the draft is over, we will be recording. So whenever that ends is when I'll be getting off. But first question here from Easy Peasy. Let's go. Love the pick. Why take a big that could be out of the league in a couple of years when you could get someone with such upside, especially late? I agree. And I think that, like, the Lakers, again, have mismanaged. We'll put it kindly, have mismanaged the back end of the roster, I think, over the last couple of seasons. And this is the type of guy that, could he end up being a Cam Reddish? Like, sure, right? Like that's maybe like the floor. That's maybe like the downside. But I think there's more of a motor there. That there's less concern with, like, how hard he plays, and there is some concern with the skill and the shot. But I think if the Lakers can continue to invest in the infrastructure, invest in player development, and get his shot right, and we saw last year, like, Bronny's shot improved. I think some of the guys in the G League showed real growth, and I'm sure he'll get some G League reps next season. Like, I think if he can get to even average to, like, slightly below average on threes, he could be a real rotation player. And anytime you're drafting a big in the second round, like, I just, there is concern, and there are certainly bigs who, arguably the most famous second round pick of all time now, Nikola Jokic, was the 41st pick. So you can find bigs in the second round. I just think that the hit rate is a bit shakier than perimeter guys. So I trust the Lakers scouting department, and I think that they deserve the benefit of the doubt here. Keon, is Adou taking Vando or DK spot? Well, I mean, in the pecking order, like, so from a positional skill set perspective, he's obviously much closer to Vando, but based on the pecking order, right? Like, Vando was ahead of Dalton just based on how the rotation went at the end of the regular season and in the playoffs. So I think he's probably more in line to take Dalton's spot, but I mean, you could make a case that he takes Vando's spot, and maybe they try to balance it with Dalton having a bigger role next season as a sophomore. I think it's too early to tell. Depends on what happens with the rest of the roster. There's, like, if DFS, there's talk today about him potentially opting out and having a market in free agency. There's, like, a disaster scenario where DFS leaves and you feel like you need to trade Rui for a center or maybe a different starting wing. You still could potentially use Vando and Adou off the bench. So I would say, I would look at it more like he's probably taking Jordan Goodwin's minutes and more of, like, that fringe 10th, 11th guy right now, but certainly has the upside to play his way into, I would say, at best, like, the 8th man. Like, I just have a tough time. And I said the same thing with Dalton, and some people got upset with that, but I have a tough time seeing him going above, like, being a top 7 guy on a team with real aspirations is tough for any rookie or young player. You have to be at a certain level, and I'm not saying it's impossible, but you have to be really sharp on both ends, or at least, like, elite on one end. I don't know if he could get quite there as a rookie, but I would say tentatively right now, I'd probably pencil him in around like the 10th, 11th guy. RGN Cal 4, thank you for the super chat. You think the Lakers pick could be like Derrick Jones Jr.? I like that comparison. Again, Sam Vecini compared him to the Thompson twins. The Ringer compared him to Tamani Kamara, so that's in line with that, of that athletic wing who can rebound, plays with a high motor, energy, defend multiple positions, an elite athlete. I would also say another difference between him and Vando is that I think he's more athletic than Vando, especially post multiple injuries. Vando, I think he had slipped athletically this past year. So I like the Derrick Jones Jr. comparison, and that's a guy who has thrived next to Luka, and that's a guy that the Lakers could certainly use. Enarks, appreciate you, says $1 for every year you're at The Athletic. Congrats again on the big move. I appreciate you. That means a lot. And I believe I owe you a DM, but I thank you for the super chat. And yes, I still haven't poured one out yet for my time at The Athletic, but I will be doing so soon. Young Claire, thank you for the super chat. Any update on Wiggins? Think a deal gets done? It's been quiet on Wiggins since yesterday. I never thought it was imminent, and that's what I came on and said on the live chat yesterday, that I was hearing there had been conversations, but I couldn't speak to it being like something that was going to happen at the draft. If you think about it, there was no first round draft capital being exchanged, so it wasn't necessary, or first round draft capital in this draft being exchanged, so there was no rush for the two sides to come to an agreement. So believe that there's going to be some haggling on Dalton the first. I assume Miami's going to ask for the moon, and the Lakers aren't going to give it to them, and they'll have to find some sort of compromise if they are going to make a deal. So I mean, with any deal, I always trend more pessimistically. I've learned my lesson of optimism in previous years. So, I mean, if you put a gun to my head, I'd probably say doesn't happen, but I think he's one of the better wings available, if not the best. And it's one of the more realistic options for the Lakers because he is available for the right price. Mamadou, thank you for the super chat. Is he a two-way player? Right now, he's more of a one-way player, I would say, or 1.5. I think there is some, one thing I didn't mention also is he's a really good transition player, so he can get out and transition more as a finisher or hit ahead guy from Luka or from LeBron. But good finisher, good offensive rebounder, really good athleticism, line drive guy who can attack off the dribble, and I assume will attack closeouts. But the issue is the shooting. As I mentioned, 26% on threes, 69% on free throws, is a guy that teams will play off at the three-point line as of right now. So he's really going to have to work on developing a three-point shot. I assume cutting will be a big part of his game, and he can function similarly to Rui in that regard as a baseline cutter, but definitely will have to improve as a three-point shooter to level up and not just be like a fringe rotation guy. Young Claire again, thank you for the super chat. Okongwu for DK Maxi 2031 first, 2030 swap. Think he's more available after KP and Asa. I reported this yesterday that I'd kind of held on to this for whatever reason, but the Lakers offered the Mark Williams package at the 2025 deadline for Walker Kessler, Okongwu, and Jalen Duren individually. Like, Mark Williams was not the top choice among that group. He was fourth, or at least fourth. I don't know all the names on the list. I just know those three names are on the list. And all three teams rejected the offer. Now, the point I've made with Okongwu, and I think I might have made it yesterday, was that Kristaps Porzingis is not the model. He's not the paragon of health in the NBA. So I would pencil Porzingis in for like 40 to 50 games at this point, based on how the last couple of seasons have gone. So they're gonna need Okongwu, and it looks like Atlanta's going for it. Like, they're making win now. They're making smart moves. I think they've had a really good offseason, but they're making more win now moves. So I don't think that he's more available. I would if I'm Atlanta, I'm valuing him as the most valuable asset of those three guys personally. So I actually don't think he's like all of a sudden more valuable. And I would say like that's basically the same thing that they offered for Mark Williams, and Atlanta already said no. So I have skepticism on Okongwu being a real I think you have to blow them away, and I don't think that offer quite does it. Tomas, thank you for the super chat. Is he a taller Westbrook without the playmaking? That's a really interesting comparison. I guess you could say that. I think that there's some recklessness to his game, an out of control element that goes with the high motor, the athleticism. I mean, it's like, I think Westbrook was like, there was certainly like Westbrook came in as a more of a defensive prospect. People forget like he won Defensive Player of the Year his sophomore year at UCLA. And there was questions about if he could be a point guard or a lead ball handler. And then he grew more into that. Knowing what Westbrook became, I think I want to pump the brakes on any Westbrook. Like Westbrook, I said, Theiro might be a 1% athlete. Like Westbrook was I would even say like 0.01% athlete. He's probably the most athletic point guard we've ever seen. It's really between him and prime Derrick Rose, but I think even Westbrook, I feel like was a little bit bigger than prime Rose. So maybe Rose was a little quicker. I don't know. That's a tough one. You're splitting hairs, but I don't know if I'd go there. But I see what you're like. Some of the general strengths and weaknesses. I think you could see like the outline of that. But Westbrook was a top, the fourth pick in the draft. He was already a pretty good player coming out. If he's a polarizing player, but pretty good from the jump. So I wouldn't go that high, but I get like the outline of the general skill set and strengths and weaknesses. I think you could make that case. Shibugan, thank you for the super chat. Have we not learned anything about trading with Miami? Can we not just avoid that bad juju for one season? I hear you. The one thing I would say that I think would be a difference with Wiggins versus Gabe Vincent or Kendrick Nunn would just be that he's taller than 6'3", and it's been specifically two small injury-prone guards that have not fared well in LA from Miami. I think Wiggins at 6'7", 6'8", different type of player, different health track record and history. The Lakers have limited options on the wings, and I think Wiggins is one of the best, if not the best wing available that's realistic for them based on their assets that doesn't require them giving up Austin. So I hear you and I get it, but I would trade for him for the right price. And I've said the right price for me is you starts it with Rui, and then I don't think I would give up a first. I think even Dalton, I would really have to think about. I probably would get there if that was like the final offer. I'd probably be okay with Rui and Dalton for Wiggins, but not the future first. Oida boy, thank you for the super chat. Does Kristaps have AIDS? I've been seeing that. I'm not gonna. I appreciate the super chat. I'm going to not just sidestep this question. I'm going to jump out of frame with this question. But I appreciate you, Young Claire. What teams have LA been in contact with this offseason? The ones I can speak to: Utah, Chicago, Brooklyn, Miami. Those would be the primary ones off the top of my head. If I pull up the standings here quickly. Yeah, say those would be the primary ones that I could talk about. Yeah. Jonathan, thank you for the super chat. I've heard Theiro's best comparison is OG Anunoby. I like that one. If he could develop his offensive game, we drafted a gem. I agree. I really like it. Again, I think you need athletic, defensive type players. I think his offensive game is better than, he doesn't have the shot yet, but that's okay. He's still relatively young. But I really like that comparison. And if he turns into OG Anunoby, obviously that's a steal RK says we needed an athletic small forward who could play defense. No one should be surprised by this trade. Another thing I would note, and I'm glad you mentioned small forward. Like I guess in theory he can play at 6 foot. He's 6'6.25", 218 pounds officially. You can theoretically play 2 through 4 at that frame. I think with his physicality and athleticism, it's probably more of a 3. And we'll see. I think to play the 2, you have to be able to shoot the ball at a certain level in today's game. And then to play the 4, obviously, that's more of centerless, small ball looks. Or, he can't play the 4 next to a center. But I think right now he projects to be more of a 3. But I think probably more of a 3-4 than like a 3-2, if that makes sense. Like with the 4 being more of the secondary position than a 2. Madison says we need better free throw shooters, but overall decent guy in second round. Yeah, I mean that is a concern. Lakers in free throw shooting have not been good for quite a few years now. Drago, thank you for the super chat. Wasn't Wiggins a head case in Golden State? Inconsistent, low motor and effort, hence Golden State getting rid of him. I think head case is a strong term here. I think inconsistent and the motor and effort are fair criticisms of Wiggins. I mean, Golden State did move on. Now, Golden State moved on for Jimmy Butler, and I think you trade Andrew Wiggins for Jimmy Butler 10 out of 10 times. I think that's a no-brainer. I also would say that they won a championship with Andrew Wiggins, and I thought there were times during that stretch where he was their third best player, and even some stretches where he was their second best player during that title run. So, now, it's different putting it together for a couple of months, 2-3 months versus putting it together for a full season or multiple seasons. But I think he has shown that, for me at least, the 2022 run changed how I viewed Andrew Wiggins forever. Like he fit into a winning system and culture in Golden State. Golden State, we've seen certain guys like Adilo, like a Kelly Oubre, and certain guys who there have been some questions about how much they care about stats versus winning and how they fit in winning cultures and stuff. Like those guys haven't fit as well in Golden State. And I think Wiggins had that stigma around him coming out of Minnesota. And I don't think it was as much of a concern. So like he did have a whole family situation where he was gone for a bit and that took its toll mentally on him. So I think he's gone through some stuff recently, but I again, like there's no, you can poke holes in just about any potential trade candidate and you give me a name, I can find 1, 2, 3 things that will give you some pause about that player as a starter, about that player as a playoff rotation guy. But with Wiggins, I think it wasn't that long ago that he was the starting small forward on a championship team. And yes, that championship team had Steph Curry more in his prime, and they had the infrastructure of the previous championships, and it was like the last ride with that group. But Wiggins was a big part of that. And I know he's not, I don't think he's been the same player since then, and I don't expect him to be that type of player. But I think for what the Lakers need, which even really offensively, I know I've seen some people call him the third option. I would still put Austin ahead of him as in terms of the offensive pecking order. But for what the Lakers need, for him to be more of a fourth option and then a primary defender, like I think he can still do that. And he still averaged 18 a game last year, 5 straight years shooting league average or better on threes, multi-positional defender. Like I know there are some concerns with the motor and the focus, but again, Lakers have relatively limited assets, relatively limited options. And I think among the realistic options, if we're really listing them out, Andrew Wiggins is at or near the top. Dre the Great, I guess Clint Capella it is. I mean, that's the way it's looking right now, barring a trade. I still think Claxton is in play, but we'll see. Dre the Great, Vando with some handle. Yeah, I would say again, I think he's more athletic than Vandal. I mean, Vando. Let's see. Kevin Brown, thank you for the super chat. What are the odds of Nick Richards landing in LA? I think the odds have gone up with what Phoenix is doing. To be honest, I don't know what Phoenix is doing. I like Malawach as a pick at number 10, and I think the Mark Williams trade is fine value. If you really look at it, it was the number 29 pick in this draft, and then it's going to be the lesser of, I believe it's Utah, Minnesota, and Cleveland in 2029. I think one of those teams will be in the 20s at that point. So like you're probably trading too late first round picks for Mark Williams, who I know the Lakers rescinded the trade because of the physical, but at least in the short term, I think seems pretty healthy and should be fine for at least the next couple of years. So I think taking a swing on that with a couple of late firsts is okay. Not like great value, but it's not as much as the Lakers gave up in the trade in February. And then Malawach, I think, was obviously a top 10 level prospect who I think would have been a great fit for the Lakers, but weren't able to pull it off. So in terms of Nick Richards, $5 million expiring contract. Lakers could get there with a Shake Milton. I mean, they could get there with a Dalton, although that's probably, I would say, an overpay, depending on how you view it. They could, I mean, that's probably the two guys that would have to be involved, unless you throw in a Gabe or a Rui and expand the trade. And then now, could you do Gabe for Royce O'Neal and Nick Richards, and you're getting off the multi-year contract of Royce O'Neal? Like, I don't know what Phoenix is doing. I can't really tell. They're doing like a half rebuild, half going for it. I mean, whatever, but I don't know. But I think it's increased that Nick Richards is available. I still look at it like it's a little hard to find a clear deal. Like, I don't know if they're just going to give him up for Shake Milton, and you would have to guarantee Shake Milton's contract for next season to trade him. I believe, if I understand the CBA rules correctly, still as a non-guarantee for the following year. So functionally is an expiring contract, but it's hard for me right now with the current intel I have to assess what Phoenix is trying to do. But just looking at it, taking an educated guess here, yes, he's more available because they just traded 2 picks for someone and took someone in the top 10. So just by virtue of that, he's third in the pecking order. Arnold, thank you for the super chat. The trade for Wiggins is neg value. Our expiration for another year at 25 million. Kleba plus Gabe, plus we needed a second for the extra year. No way, Rui. So I think you're saying you would not trade Rui for Wiggins, and you would want to trade Kleba and Gabe, and if the Lakers had a second. I'll say, like, I know clearly based on the chat, this is a polarizing topic with Wiggins versus Rui. I think Wiggins is better than Rui. I think he's a better, I'll say we can debate the offensive end, although I think he has a more proven track record in history on the offensive end. I think defensively, he's just I don't even think it's debatable who's the better defender. And I think Rui's a bit of a tweener on that end of, like, he can guard some, like, he's more of a 4, but he's not like an elite defender at the 4 either. Whereas Wiggins has shown an ability to be a good to really good defender on 2s and 3s throughout his career. So has he slipped maybe a little bit the past year or so? Sure. But I still think there's a notable gap there on the defensive end, to say nothing of, I also think there's a gap on the offensive end. Rui's a better shooter, and you could argue that maybe that makes him a better fit around Luka offensively. But in terms of, if we're talking about who's the better fit, like, we can't really prove who's better, but what we can discuss, and I think there's a clear answer here, is who's the better fit around Luka, LeBron, and Austin. And I think that's clearly Andrew Wiggins. So now I know you're taking on the extra year, and that affects potentially the Lakers' cap space in 2026. And that's a real concern. And if you want to make that argument that that's why you wouldn't do it, that's fair. But if we're just talking straight up, like Wiggins versus Rui, I think Wiggins is better. And I think it's pretty clear, to be honest. Boy, do you think the Lakers can retain DFS this free agency? I do. I think right now some of the stuff that's coming out is a bit of posturing, to be completely honest. I think DFS is either going to opt out and re-sign or opt in and extend. I think he's about to be, he might be 32 already or is about to be 32. I'm going to check quickly. Yeah, he just turned 32 in May. So like if the Lakers are willing to even give him 4 years, which I think the ideal amount would be 3, but maybe you give him that 4th year just to secure it and worry about it a little bit later. I mean, he's got the relationship with Luka. He liked being in LA. They invested a decent amount to get him. I think he's going to stay. I think right now, this is the smokescreen season, right? Like this is when people posture, and I'm sure that there's an element of just him trying to get a better bag from the Lakers. BT, if Claxton is a lob threat that can protect the rim and guard 1 through 5, why do people like Kessler over him? Hashtag trade AR for anything less than an all-star. We riot. So it's a good question. And I'm in the camp that likes Kessler better. I think Kessler, they're different. Like there are some similarities, but I view Kessler as Gobert 2.0. I think he's like similar size and similar strengths and similar, honestly, similar production at this point, like Kessler versus young Gobert. But I think Kessler is a bit more mobile defensively, and Kessler has much better hands, is a better lob threat, is a better finisher, better touch around the basket. He's got a nice hook shot. He's got these little runners and floaters that he has that Gobert, for all the talk about Gobert not holding up in the playoffs defensively, which there have been series where he has struggled, most notably, I think that 2021 series against the Clippers where Terrence Mann dropped 40 and he just couldn't protect the rim and close out, which is tough for any big to do, but like he got tested defensively in that series. I think with Kessler, with Gobert, we saw in the Lakers series, especially outside of game 5, he really struggled with catching the ball. He brings it down. He'll get stripped. He'll miss layups. He'll miss putbacks. Like Kessler, that's less of a concern. I think like he's one of the best finishers in the league statistically. And just at that size with the soft touch, like he's just, I see a lot of Zubats actually in Kessler's game. Zubats is a bit thicker and stronger, but I think Kessler could potentially get there. So Kessler I see more as like that Gobert Zubats type. With Claxton, he's much more of, I would say, I guess like more in the Tyson Chandler, DeAndre Jordan mold, but he's a bit switchy. Like I guess, I mean, it's tough. Like he's more of almost a 4 defensively in a way, but he is 6'11". Now, why people like Claxton better than, or Kessler better than Claxton? He's a bit younger. He's still on a rookie deal. I think he is a better finisher in terms of just the variety of finishes. There's a size element. He's a better rebounder. So yes, I think Claxton, to your point, might be, I think he's a better fit with Luka, arguably. Like it's arguable. But because of the mobility, because of the lob threat, like those two things, I think he could do better than Kessler. He can jump higher. Kessler's a pretty good lob threat though. So I think ultimately like just Kessler's the better player, and that's why I would rather have Kessler. And then he's also younger, cost controlled with the contract. With Claxton, there's also a bit of concern with his weight and his strength, whereas Kessler is also a bit on the slight side, but is I think a bit wider, a bit stronger. Compared to Claxton, just has a bigger frame. So I think they're relatively close. Again, I think Kessler's the better player. He's also has the better contract. So you factor that in, and younger, like I'd rather have Kessler compared to Claxton, but you could make the case that like from a pure fit and skill set perspective, that Claxton's rim running and lob threat ability, as well as his ability to switch out more on the perimeter, play a more versatile, mobile scheme. Like I think JJ would rather switch 1 through 5 and continue that defensive style rather than play drop coverage. If you have Kessler, you're going to play drop coverage, and that limits your defensive flexibility there. So I think it's relatively close, but again, I think Kessler's better, younger, better contract. So all those things tilt in Kessler's direction. Oida boy, what's your opinion on the T-Mac / Wade Kobe comments? I think it's dumb. I think I think two things can be true, right? So I think, could the Lakers have potentially won championships with another elite shooting guard in Kobe's spot? Yes, I think they could have. Were those guys as good as Kobe? No. Would they have won 3 in a row? Potentially not. Do people overlook how dominant Kobe was during the middle series in those runs? Yes. And you look at his performances against Sacramento and San Antonio in particular. So I think this is where it's a nuanced conversation. In general, I will say I disagree with the premise that I feel like people are treating it like you just replace Kobe with anybody or like any all-star shooting guard and the Lakers are still winning the 3 titles. That I strongly disagree with. I think that's just not true. Now, if you go back to prime T-Mac, prime D Wade, prime Allen Iverson, prime Vince, I don't know about Vince Carter. Like he's maybe a border, like prime Ray Allen. Some of these guys, could they have won a title with that guy as the number 2 next to Shaq with the teams that they had with Phil Jackson as the coach? I think there are like alternate scenarios, alternate universes in which they do still win a championship, maybe even still win 2, depending on the player and how things shake out. But I don't know if any of those guys, I would say, I'll stake my opinion here. I don't think they would have three-peated with any of those guys in place of Kobe. And I think Kobe's contributions are being overlooked. And now again, it's a nuanced conversation. If it's, I think it was more of a 1A, 1B, I still would put Shaq as the 1A. And there's a reason why he won the 3 finals MVPs. And I also think there's been a little bit of revisionist history as to I think most people at the time considered Shaq the better player and the more dominant player. So I do still put him ahead of Kobe during the three-peat run, but I think it was close. I think there were stretches and series where Kobe was the better player. And I think it's disrespectful that people are a lot of revisionist history here with how good, let me take that back, how great Kobe was during that three-peat run. So that's my short opinion on that. This stuff is wild. Just the D, all levels. That is, speaking of wild, that is a wild username. Thank you for the super chat. Do you think it was easier to build around AD? I mean, if you're saying AD versus Luka, yes and no. I think it's easier to build a defense around AD because he's an elite defender. So you just need a couple of other good defenders and you're probably going to have a good defense. And then offensively, he can fit with other ball handlers, but I don't think AD is a true, I don't know if AD is a true number 1 offensively. I think you probably want, and that's no shade at him. And I think he could still be a top 10 player because he's so great defensively. He might be the best defensive player in the league. He doesn't necessarily need to be a number 1 to still be a top 10 guy. But I don't know if you want AD being your true blue number 1. I think he's an elite, best of the best number 2. And that's where Luka, I just think there's a difference there where Luka has been the healthier player up until this past season, but even then played more games than AD. And yes, there's obvious defensive limitations and concerns with Luka, but we've seen with Luka as your best, unequivocal best player, Dallas went to the conference finals and the finals. I think in 2020, it was close between LeBron and AD, but LeBron was still the better player. He won finals MVP. 2023, we could argue that AD was the better player. I also think that was pretty close, and you could make a case in either direction. So, I mean, maybe it's one conference finals with AD as the best player versus one conference finals and finals with Luka as the best player. But I think the hardest thing to find in the NBA is that top 5 to 7 offensive guy who can be a true number 1. And I think that's Luka. So I think if you want to say, is it maybe harder to build around Luka and LeBron because of some of the duplication there versus LeBron and AD? That's where maybe I can see that argument. But in general, just as a building block, Luka versus AD, I think Luka's better. He's younger. He's had a couple of deep playoff runs. I think you just need the athletes and the size and the defense around him, where with AD, I think you still need that true number 1 scorer, in my opinion. Jordan G. LA, Kessler, RJ Barrett, Utah, Reeves, Toronto, Rui, draft comp from Utah, then try to use the Vincent Kleba contracts for Wiggins. Excuse me while I quickly fix my hair. Utah's not doing this. Utah's not giving up Kessler and draft compensation for Austin. The Lakers, Rui and Reeves for Kessler and Barrett. I think LA considers it. I don't know that they do it, but I would say Utah doesn't do this, and Toronto, depending on the draft compensation, they potentially consider it. But it seems like Toronto's going for it. Boogie, thank you for the super chat. Rui and Gabe, maybe a first for RJ Barrett. There we go. Back-to-back Toronto questions. I think the price might be higher. I don't know if Rui in a first gets you RJ Barrett, to be honest. It's interesting. I don't know if he's good enough defensively for what you would want at that starting wing spot, to be honest, like for what the Lakers specifically need, but it's an interesting one. John Drake, thoughts on Ayton and Thibault and Rob Williams. I like all three individually. Of course, like you're not going to get, I don't even know if I'll say Ayton, it's tough already to match Ayton's contract at $35 million. Thibault's at around 11. Rob Williams is at also around like 12, 13 or so. So those two individually or together is more realistic to match. Ayton, you have to include Rui, and now you're in this territory of like, if it's Rui, Gabe, and Maxi Kleba, you're giving up two of your top seven. And now all of a sudden, I think you do, like, if you're trading Rui for a wing, I kind of like that a little bit more. If you're trading Rui for a big, now you have, even though there is a bit of a logjam already at the power forward spot, like you still need that wing spot. And if it's Thibault, now you're in the mid 40s in terms of salary, and that's just even harder for them to match. Like they're not going to take on Vando. That's not a contract people are going to want unless you're attaching a first. So individually, like Ayton, his fit has grown on me again. I just think it's tough to match the salary. Thibault I like as like a back end rotation guy. I know the shot's been better, but it's still relatively shaky, and that's a limitation on him. Like I think he could be better than Vando, but still, they might have just drafted that type of player in, Thiero, and Rob Williams is actually the guy that, in going through the center rankings, I think that I might have him number 3 behind Nick Claxton and Daniel Gafford. I think if the Lakers if it's like Clint Capella and just having a relatively pedestrian, like fringe starter level, probably more of a backup level center versus the upside of Robert Williams, yes, a lot of concern with the health. He's played 61 games the last 3 years, but his upside is so much higher than a Capella, than a Lopez. Like he's an elite shot blocker. He's an elite finisher. He's a good rebounder. He would fit with Luka. He's an expiring contract on a reasonable deal. If you could find a way to flip Gabe plus something or Kleba plus something for Robert Williams, I would do that in a heartbeat. And then you could still sign Capella and just bring him off the bench. Oida boy, I think T-Mac is foul for trying to devalue claim a dead homie's accomplishments to boost himself. T-Mac never made the finals. Wade too. He played against those Celtics and should know how hard it was. The other thing I'll note here is, well, you said T-Wack, not T-Mac. T-Mac had opportunities to make you can't say you never, he played with like those Rockets teams with Yao were on paper pretty good in the West, like not top 2 or 3, but they were at least threats to potentially get lucky and like make a conference finals. And that never happened. Of course, like with T-Mac, it's always hard because he had so many injuries, and I want to like properly contextual, just you could take the Kobe quote. Kobe said T-Mac was Kobe, but taller. I think that was more so Kobe giving T-Mac his flowers. And I don't think he was ever quite, maybe you could argue there was a couple years there. I think there was a couple years there they were really close and it was debatable, like that kind of 2002, 2003 era. But that was really just a couple years. I think basically before and after then, they were not that close. And Kobe's Kobe. Like, I don't feel like I need to really go into more detail. Wade, I think, was much closer and won a title as the best player, won a couple titles as the second best player, but he also had his fair share of struggles too when he was the primary guy, like post 2006. So yeah, I mean, it's. I think we're in agreement. John Drake, what team do you think should trade for Reeves? I think he would have been an interesting fit in Orlando pre-Bane trade. Off the top of my head, I think he'd be interesting in Houston Van Vliet just signed a 2-year deal, so it doesn't make as much sense now. But if they wanted to go in a different direction, if he was in the Van Vliet role and he's surrounded by athleticism, you got the primary scorer in KD, you got the number 2 guy in Şengün. He could be the number 3 offensively or even the number 4, depending on what happens with Amen Thompson. And then you got a bevy of athletic, long, tough wings. You got Thompson, you got Smith, you got Eason, you got Cam Whitmore, you got Steven Adams. So, like, I think him being a team with a lot of defenders and athleticism, I think if Memphis moves off Ja, Memphis could be an interesting one. But, they're probably in a rebuilding phase. I'm trying to think. I just had the standings up. Let me skim through quickly. I guess Minnesota would be an interesting one if he replaces Conley. Like, I'm trying to think of him replacing smaller point guards as the primary or like kind of ball handler with another star. So Minnesota, obviously, with Ant. Dallas is an interesting one. And yeah, I mean, otherwise, Milwaukee, I guess, but once Dame's back, that's an awkward fit. Tybo, Effen, Dalton, Vando for Kessler. That would not, Utah would not do that. Vando's contract is viewed as a negative. It's 3 years left at 11 to 12 million. I think right now he's viewed as more of like a minimum type player or at best taxpayer MLE guy. So I think at like in the most optimistic view, he's like making double what he's worth and potentially even 10 times what he's worth, or not 10, but like 4 if he's a minimum guy. So, and you got 3 more years. So the Vando contract's going to be really tough to move. I mean, I think you got to start with Dalton in a first, and I don't think Utah does that. All right, going about 10 more minutes here. Sorry, just catching up with my texts. John, thank you for the super chat. JB, could they get Claxton and Cam Thomas from Brooklyn? Salute. Shalom, retired senior chief petty officer, United States Navy. Thank you for your service. And in terms of, well, Cam Thomas is a restricted free agent, so that would have to be a sign-in trade, and that would hard cap the Lakers at the first apron. So it's possible. It would. I think he's probably, when you factor in his contract, it's going to be, I mean, I would assume he's going to make at least 15 to 20 million, somewhere in that range annually. So you factor that in with Claxton, who's already making in the mid 20s, you're getting to around like at least 40 to 45 million. And that's going to be hard for the Lakers to match. And then on top of that, LA is already projected to be above the first apron. So they would actually have to find a way to shed additional salary to get under the first apron. So I would say it is technically possible, but unrealistic. But any on-draft options? Not. We still don't know who's going to get drafted and what their pick 50. What is it? Pick 53 right now. It depends who gets drafted, who doesn't. But once that happens, I will be checking in with people to figure it out. DA Berka says Vlad Golden if unrestricted free agent. AAA says, you guys don't seem to understand the Lakers issue. You can't have LeBron, Luka, and AR on the court at the same time. That is losing strategy. AR must go, must go. I'll say this, and I've been making this point recently. Like, I think having those three together, you do have and I would put LeBron to the side because I think LeBron's defense was at a high enough level last year where I'm not going to lump him in here. But I think there are real challenges to putting Luka and Austin together defensively. I think offensively they fit. I think AR can be that Jalen Brunson, Kyrie Irving type that Luka's played with in Dallas, be that secondary ball handler, shot creator, playmaker. And I think he showed that. And the numbers with Luka and Austin on together actually were pretty good last season, like isolating for those two specifically. Defensively, there are real concerns and there are real limitations. And I understand that. I think you have to nail the other three positions with athleticism, defense, motor, energy, toughness, physicality, all those traits you need. And that's why, again, I think the Lakers need a new starting center and a new defensive wing. And that doesn't mean they have to get rid of Rui. That doesn't mean they have to get rid of DFS or Gabe or any of those guys necessarily. But like, they need a new starting center that is a certain level of rim threat, rebounder, defensive, defender. And then they need a certain level of starting wing that can defend multiple positions, be the primary defensive guy, and shoot threes, ideally at least at league average, if not higher. So if you get those two things, I think it can work. If you run it back and you just have Clint Capella and Rui, or Clint Capella and DFS, then I agree with you. I think that starting group isn't good enough. I think it really depends on how they build the roster. So I disagree with the absolute claim here that it cannot work. I think it's a little tricky. I think you have to be careful with how you build the roster. But if they just run it back, then I totally agree. Keon Park, thank you for the super chat. Vando came from the Jazz. They probably knew what Vando is and won't be 3-and-D. They won't take Vando, especially with that contract. If possible, trade Maxey and DK for Kess. I will just say one thing with Kessler. If you're proposing Kessler trades, I think it has to start with Dalton, a first, and a swap. Like, that's, I think, the minimum. Then we could talk about like the other contracts you're throwing in and how Utah matches that. But I think that's, again, the Lakers offered that. As I said earlier in the show, they offered that at the deadline, Dalton, a first, and a swap. And Utah said no. So I don't think Kessler's price has dropped at all. If anything, it stayed the same or gone up. So that's the minimum price to start any Kessler conversation. And even then, that wasn't enough at the deadline. And it's probably not enough right now. I think Utah just wants a ransom for him. But I agree on the Vando point and the limitations there. John Drake, thank you for the super chat again. And I haven't commented yet on the profile picture, but I like the cigar there. If Reeves stays like him off the bench, if we could get Wiggins, Rob, Alexander. Oh, okay. If Reeves stays, you like him off the bench. If they can get Wiggins, Robert Williams, and Nickeil Alexander-Walker. I don't see Nickeil Alexander-Walker being likely because that would require them getting under the first apron. And that would really have to be LeBron. It's either LeBron taking a $15 to $20 million pay cut or LA being able to salary dump $15 to $20 million, which you're going to have to attach an asset to. So I guess there's if you're getting Wiggins and Robert Williams and salary dumping in like 3 separate trades, maybe you could combine it into one trade or 2 separate trades. That's still kind of tough for me to see with the available assets. In theory, I like what you're saying. And if it was like a Robert Williams, Wiggins, Nickeil, like if they add those 3 guys, I think it's an awesome offseason, like, no doubt. But I think it's going to be tough, especially Alexander Walker might even get more than the taxpayer mid-level exception, but we'll see. Ryan Tutton, do we really think trading Rui is the best idea? He was the best 3-point shooter last year. I don't think like the Lakers have to trade Rui, and I think there are scenarios in which they can keep him that I think make a lot of sense. I think the larger point is if we are taking the Lakers at face value and everything they've said publicly and privately has been they really like Luka, LeBron, and Austin together. If that is the foundation, if those are the 3 pillars, to quote Rob Pelinka at exit interviews, you cannot have Rui be the 4th starter with another center. That's just not good enough defensively. You don't have defensive versatility. You're starting basically 3 power forwards defensively. So then we're talking about moving Rui to the bench, and I think that actually could work. And I think when looking at the elite teams in the league, for most of them, Rui would come off the bench and be more of a bench scorer type. So you could sell me on that. But the Lakers just have limited resources to trade. Rui is, in my opinion, arguably their 3rd best resource. That's realistic if they're not trading Austin. I think it's the 2031 or 32 pick. I think it's Dalton, and then I think it's Rui. So if they don't want to trade one of the first 2, then you kind of get to Rui just by process of elimination. Or if you do trade the first 2, then the next best thing to trade is Rui. So again, I think there are scenarios that make sense to not trade Rui. And I think in a perfect world, they don't trade Rui. They just move him to the bench and he's more of a 6th or 7th man. I just think the issue is they have limited resources to trade. And if they really want to address the starting center spot and the starting wing spot and also add depth, it's hard to not trade Rui. But again, I'm not saying they have to. I'm just saying if we look at it realistically, it's hard to keep him out. K Nell, thank you for the super chat. Is AR really worth quarter billion post LeBron, AR, Luka? So you're talking about the most that Austin. I'm glad because I did a video on this earlier, and it's a 6-minute video. So I talk about Austin for 2 minutes. I've been saying for months that Austin was going to turn down this contract extension. The Lakers are going to offer it as a mere formality, 4 years, $89.2 million. That is below market value for Austin. His market value, in talking to people close to the situation, also talking to people around the league, it's starting at $30 million. Like if Austin was a free agent right now, and projects to be for next summer, he's walking into 30 plus million annually. Like that is the starting point for Austin. I know some people think that's an overpay. I know some people don't think he's going to get that. Like I am very, very confident that barring a catastrophic injury or a catastrophic fall off regression from Austin next season, he's going to get 30 plus million annually, as a free agent next year from the Lakers or from someone else. Now, is he worth $250 million? You're talking about 5 years, $250 million, which is around the most the Lakers can offer. I would say no. I do not think Austin is worth $250 million. I do not think Austin is worth $50 million a year. So I've been saying I think he's going to get 30 to 35 million. Maybe the Lakers, depending on how he continues to grow and develop, can you talk me into like maybe high 30s? Maybe. I think as of right now, I feel more comfortable in that 30 to 35 million range. 50 a year, I think that's out of his price range. Like 50, we're talking about, honestly, 3rd team All-NBA, like bona fide all-star types. I do not think Austin is there right now. And I don't know if he'll ever, realistically, he won't get to that level. So I don't want to put a ceiling on him just because I think he's gotten better every year. But for now, based on what we know and what we've seen, and also factoring in the playoff struggles against Minnesota, I think 30 to 35 is more realistic. And that allows you to still go. Lakers are projected to have around 80 million in cap space next summer. That allows you to still go get a Jaren Jackson Jr. type or another like legit number 2 star if LeBron retires or potentially goes elsewhere to finish his career. So I would say the 5. I know people are going to throw out the 250. I think that's too high. If it's 4 years, 120, or 5 years, 150, or 4 years, 100 and whatever's 35, 140, or 5 years and 185, something like that. Like that's more realistic to me. But 50 million a year, I think is too high. Okay, Nell, thank you again for another super chat. What contender would pay AR 35 plus million? They should be our trade partners, by the way. I love AR. I'd have to really dig in to who's going to be. I mean, I know San Antonio was interested in him going back to 2023. They were the team that considered. I know there's been some interest with Houston, but again, like that was years ago, like that was previously. So with San Antonio now, they got Castle, they got Harper, they got Fox. With Houston now, Van Vliet, Thompson, they have a deep perimeter group. So I don't know if either of those teams are realistic. Like I think there's also going to be teams that make trades or teams that pivot during the season. So it's tough to say now who's going to pay him that, but I think it's going to be the Lakers. I think the Lakers are going to pay him 30 plus. I don't know if it gets to 35, but I think it's going to get to at least 30. J1, let DFS walk and sign Na with the full MLE. That's an option. You just have to hope Luka's okay with it. And in that case, I mean, that's a way to, you could keep Rui at that point. You could start Na and have a starting lineup of a center, Luka, LeBron, Austin, and Na. But I mean, I don't know if Luka would be cool with that. Luka and DFS are very close. Ken asks, who's not? Na is Nickeil Alexander-Walker. Vince, Lakers need legit center like Kessler. I agree. It's just it's tough to get there. AAA says AR is a $5 million a year player. I disagree with that. Let's see. Sorry, I'm catching up on making sure I didn't miss. Okay. Just sorry. I know this is great streaming. Arun, thank you for the super chat. Do you think Austin Reeves could be enough of a trade asset to entice the Pacers into partying with one of their young wings or guards like Nembhard, Mathurin, or Neesmith? I like this question because we did talk about it on the stream yesterday, but I know not everyone watched the stream. It was 4 hours. Shout out to Buha's block team, Keone, Kevin, and VJ. The one thing with trading for Reeves with Indiana, like I think Indiana is going to do something similar to Boston in terms of having that gap year where they're looking more at 2026, 27, when Tyrese will theoretically be recovered and back. The one thing is that if you think about what this group would, the group of Indiana would look like with Halliburton back, I think they have the perfect roster. I mean, clearly, like they nearly won the NBA championship. I think they have the perfect roster for a Tyrese Halliburton team for 2 years from now, and trading for Austin doesn't really fit that, especially if you're giving up one of these guys. Like I like Nembhard and Halliburton better as a backcourt than Austin and Halliburton, just because of the defensive limitations there. Like I thought Halliburton was passable. He was fine for a lot of stretches of the playoffs, but he was the guy that teams targeted. I think if you replace those guys with Austin, there's going to be more of that. So I think there's a clear limitation to an Austin. And I view it different than Luka, to be clear, because I'm sure some people can make that connection or make the same argument, because Luka's 6'8" and Tyrese Halliburton's 6'4". And I think Luka, even though he has his own defensive limitations, like you can still put an elite guard next to Austin and kind of protect the backcourt that way, and then also have an elite wing and protect Luka that way. Whereas with Halliburton and Austin together, you're just kind of stuck with two guards that there are some questions about their playoff viability and teams targeting them. So I think from Indiana's perspective, I just don't think Austin, like if they're trying to maximize the next season, you can make that case of let Austin run the show with Siakam and let him fit into their culture and whatever. But if I'm Indiana, like next year's a wash, even if you had Austin, it's all about 2026, 27. And at that point, I don't think Austin makes as much sense. Jackson, thank you for the super chat. Jovan, Rockets are scary with KD. Thoughts? Yeah, I mean, I think they're probably my pick for second best team in the West. Clearly, OKC won. I think Houston's right there. You could, like Denver, I still think it's close between Denver and Indiana in terms of, I actually think, I know that the like game 7 is tough to evaluate because Halliburton got injured in the first quarter. But even putting game 7 aside, because Denver got blown out in game 7, I thought Denver blew 2 games in that series. I think Indiana only blew 1. So I think you could argue that Denver actually gave OKC the biggest scare of any team in a playoff series during this championship run. So I think Denver, while like they might not be the juggernaut in the regular season that they were a couple years ago, I think they're a team that should contend for 50 wins. And they're going to, even if they're in that 4 or 5 mix, like they're going to be a team that no one wants to see in a playoff series as long as they have prime Jokic. And like, I just think that's a tough team. So like they're more of a playoff riser in my opinion. Then you still got Minnesota, who I think should be in the mix. Depends what happens with Naz Reid and and do they make a bigger trade potentially this summer? But I think Houston's right there. They were the 2 seed last year. And in my opinion, they traded, like Dylan Brooks is a loss for the defense, but I also think sometimes he'd hijack the offense and take over in a bad way. Jalen Green, if you're just going Jalen Green to KD, I think that's like an enormous leap, multiple tiers up. So, I mean, they just added a top, at worst, 15 player, if not top 10 player in KD. They needed a crunch time guy who could get them easy buckets. He's a bailout guy. So I think they're right there. Like I do think there's still a notable gap between OKC and the rest of the West, including Houston. But if I had to tentatively pick a team to come out of the West that was not OKC, I think I would slightly lean Houston. Because the other thing is they're also going to have their non-taxpayer MLE. So they could go sign a Na. They could go sign a DFS. They could go sign another player of consequence, another player of impact. And that starting group of Şengün, Smith, KD, Thompson, and Van Vliet is scary. Then you got, Adams, Eason, Shepherd, and Whitmore still developing, and Whitmore showed a lot of flashes. And then you could still get another guy who, like, if you add Na or DFS or someone like that to that mix, that's a tough team with depth and physicality and defense. So yeah, I think they're right there. Would not surprise me if they're a mid-50s number 2 seed again. But I think they're more playoff viable now. All right, going a couple more minutes. Jonathan Mejia, thank you for the super chat. Should we bring back Taurean Prince on a vet minimum? What about Gary Trent using the taxpayer MLE? Yes to both. I think Taurean on a vet min is, if anything, even slight value. Like you can maybe even argue for him as a taxpayer MLE guy. I would not, because the Lakers have such limited resources and that's the primary free agency resource, I would not want him on a taxpayer MLE, though I think you could argue he's worth that. Vet minimum, yes. Gary Trent, I think, like, again, from a value perspective, is clearly a taxpayer MLE guy, maybe even a non-taxpayer MLE guy. The issue is the Lakers get one at bat with the taxpayer MLE, and depending on how aggressive they are with the trades, if they're only acquiring one starter with a trade, then you almost have to acquire that other starter with the taxpayer MLE. And Gary Trent is not like that wing that you want defensively. Like I think he's an elite 6-man, bench guard type, and maybe even a starter for certain teams if you have the right build. But that's like, and there is like a Mendoza line here where if it gets to a certain, okay, Amir Coffey is probably a better fit for what the Lakers need in terms of a bigger wing, but Gary Trent's obviously a much better player. So if it's like Amir Coffey versus Gary Trent, sure, I'd rather have Gary Trent, better value, better player, and you just kind of figure, you're gonna have to figure it out. But so there's a line there. But in general, I think the Lakers with that taxpayer MLE need a defensive wing or a center. All right. Madison, Jovan, your logic suggests we trade AR for an elite defender. I don't really want to go down the AR rabbit hole, even though I picked this question. The one thing I would say with this is that you still need the offensive end. The Lakers were not a good offensive team post Luka trade. They were a slightly above average team offensively post Luka trade. For all of Austin's limitations and faults and whatever blame you want to put on him, he was a big part of whenever their offense looked good. Of course, Luka was a big part. Of course, LeBron was a big part, but Austin was right there at number 3. So if you trade, the argument I've made recently is like, if you trade Austin for a defensive player and you think you're going to go replace Austin with a vet minimum player or a taxpayer MLE player, I think you're sorely mistaken on how much of a hit they're going to take on the offensive end. So that's just one thing that I think should be noted is that I think if you're trading Austin, yes, ideally you're getting a certain type of defender, but I also think you need a certain offensive floor with whatever player you're getting. If you're just trading Austin for a defender, I think you take an even bigger step back offensively. And I think the Lakers already, like on paper, they have all this firepower because they have Luka and they have LeBron. But outside of those guys, like there's not much there offensively. Like Rui can maybe do a little bit more than they've allowed him to do, but this isn't some offensive juggernaut with all this firepower and the shooting is inconsistent. The shot creation is inconsistent outside of the top of the roster. So I think if you just trade Austin for a defensive guy, you are taking a big step back offensively. And like, sure, you're better defensively, but the Lakers need both. They need to get better on both sides. And that's where I think it's a delicate balance with how they build the roster. But I'm going to wrap here. I appreciate you guys for rocking with me. Shout out to the Late Night Gang. I'll be back tomorrow with a new episode of Buha's Block. I'll also be back with a new new episode and the debut episode of the Great Western Forum with Pete Zayas and Anthony Irwin. Thank you all so much for watching and listening. For those watching on YouTube, please be sure to hit that subscribe button, turn on channel notifications, and like and comment on this video. Let's get those likes up. And for those listening on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or your podcast platform of choice, please be sure to follow, download, and leave a 5-star review. I will talk to you all